I never thought anyone would call me out like that, especially her. "You'll never find someone like me," she had said, voice quiet, almost teasing, but there was an edge I couldn't place. I remember standing there, half shocked, half annoyed, trying to shrug it off, but my chest tightened in a way that didn't make sense. She wasn't the type to throw lines like that at just anyone. And yet, there I was, caught. The repair shop smelled like motor oil and rubber, a scent I usually hated, but somehow, that morning, it felt different. It was quieter than usual. Most of the morning rush had died down, leaving just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional clang of a wrench. I was trying to focus on an engine diagnosis when she walked in, heels tapping lightly on the concrete floor, carrying a leather-bound notebook that somehow looked too delicate for this place. She always had this air about her, like she moved through rooms knowing exactly who she was and what she wanted, even if she never said it out loud. Mid-40s, sharp lines around her eyes that softened when she smiled, hair the color of dark chestnut that caught the light in subtle streaks. Confident. Patient. And yet, I sometimes caught a flicker in her gaze that made me wonder if she carried her own regrets, hidden under that perfectly composed exterior. I looked up from the car hood just in time to meet her eyes. There was that pause again, those brief, weightless seconds where neither of us moved. The world outside the shop seemed to vanish. My stomach flipped in a way I hated myself for noticing. She raised an eyebrow slightly, as if noticing my tension but not mocking it, just acknowledging it. That acknowledgement alone made me feel both exposed and alive. She set her notebook on the counter, fingers brushing mine accidentally, or maybe not. The contact was fleeting, but the spark it left lingered, like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. "Morning," she said, voice steady, casual, like she had no idea what she did to me. But her eyes, they lingered on mine for a heartbeat too long, and I swear I felt her assessing me, reading the parts one usually hide even from myself. I cleared my throat and tried to focus on the task at hand, faking indifference while stealing glances at her. She moved with an ease that made every small action look deliberate, the tilt of her head as she glanced at a car part, the way she adjusted her notebook, the faintest smile tugging at her lips as if she knew a secret I wasn't supposed to know. Then, without warning, she handed me a cup of coffee. "You look like you need this," she said. Just a simple act. No fanfare. No explanation. And yet, it hit me in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. My fingers brushed hers again as I took the cup, and I noticed her pulse at the wrist, quick, subtle. I drank too quickly, coughing, laughing awkwardly, feeling the warmth of the cup and the heat of the moment collide. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. That this was just her being considerate. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, about her, about the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't noticing. Something about the way she lingered in the doorway as she left for her meeting. It wasn't over, not really. I leaned against the counter, staring at the empty space where she had been, and realized I'd been holding my breath. The words she had thrown at me, "You'll never find someone like me," played over and over, looping in my head. I didn't know if it was a challenge or a warning, or maybe both. All I knew was that I couldn't stop replaying that tiny spark between us, that brush of fingers, that fleeting look. And I was certain, in a way I didn't want to admit, that I would see her again, and I would be paying attention this time. Because something about her stayed behind, like a shadow in the sunlight, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was another quiet morning at the shop. I'd just finished aligning a stubborn brake caliper when she walked back in, notebook clutched under her arm, and the familiar click of her heels echoed in the empty space. She gave me a small nod, but her eyes were distant, like she was carrying the weight of something I wasn't supposed to see. "Can you help me with this?" she asked, sliding a file across the counter. The gesture was casual, almost businesslike, but the tremor in her fingers betrayed her calm exterior. I noticed it immediately, the way her nails pressed lightly into the edge of the folder, how her thumb tapped against the cover when she wasn't looking. I moved closer, leaning over the counter to glance at her notes, careful not to crowd her. She stayed stiff, shoulders tight, posture precise. There was an invisible line between us, a subtle pull I didn't dare cross. And yet, every time she hesitated, every brief glance sideways, my heart thudded like I'd just stepped into a storm I wasn't ready for. "Looks like you've been at this a while," I said quietly. Trying to fill the silence, I motioned to the stack of papers. Her laugh, low and restrained, brushed against the words. It wasn't full, not really, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. Yeah, she admitted, shaking her head as if brushing away a memory. "It's complicated." I could see it in the set of her jaw, the tiny crease between her brows. For a moment, she seemed smaller, vulnerable in a way she never let anyone notice. Her hands fidgeted with a pen, tracing invisible lines along the counter. She looked tired, more than I'd expected, like the weight of something unspoken had been pressing on her for longer than she realized. I wanted to say something that would bridge the gap between us, but the words caught in my throat. So instead, I just watched. I watched the way her hair fell over one eye when she leaned forward, the quiet sigh she couldn't quite hide, the momentary softness in her expression before she pulled it back into control. I reached out instinctively, just to adjust a stray sheet of paper, my fingers brushing hers in the process. She froze, blinked, and then looked up, eyes wide for just a second before settling back into composure. That pause, longer than a blink, shorter than a breath, was charged. "Thanks," she murmured, voice barely above the hum of the fluorescent lights. The word was small, but it carried more than politeness. Gratitude, hesitation, something unspoken lurking beneath the surface. We worked side by side in silence for a while. My hands busy, hers tracing lines on the page, the proximity creating a tension that wasn't quite uncomfortable but wasn't easy either. Every glance, every accidental touch felt magnified, electric in a way I didn't want to ignore. And then, just as she started to leave, she turned, just slightly, and our eyes met again. A quiet acknowledgement passed between us, loaded with a softness and a restraint I couldn't name. My chest tightened. Her lips parted as if she were about to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she gave the smallest nod, a fleeting smile, and walked away, leaving me staring at the spot where she had been. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because even in that simple gesture, she had left a trace of something forbidden and magnetic, something I would be chasing in my thoughts long after the shop smelled like oil and paper and coffee. The storm hit just as we were locking up the shop. Rain pounded the windows in heavy sheets, turning the parking lot into a blurred reflection of neon signs and streetlights. I offered her my jacket, it was a reflex, and she hesitated, just long enough for the air between us to thicken. Her fingers brushed mine for a fraction of a second as she took it, and I felt a pulse in my chest that didn't belong to the weather. We stayed in the doorway, watching the rain. Neither of us said anything at first. I could hear the faint catch in her breath, the way her shoulders had stiffened against the wind. She was quieter than usual, almost fragile, but her eyes held that same sharp intelligence, scanning me, weighing me, daring me to say something I wasn't sure I should. "I didn't expect this," I said finally, voice too casual, too measured. She laughed softly, but it was a little forced, a little hollow. Neither did I. There was a pause, long enough for her gaze to drop, and I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands as she gripped the jacket. Then, her phone buzzed, an incoming call that flashed across the screen, a name I didn't recognize, but the tension it drew from her was immediate. She glanced at it, fingers hovering, and then let it go to voicemail. The moment cracked. A faint exhale, a tightening of her jaw, and I realized just how human she was, how much she carried that she wouldn't, or couldn't, share. I wanted to say something, but the words tangled up in my throat. All I could do was stand there, aware of how close we were, aware of the warmth radiating from her against the storm and the jacket she now held like a shield. My hand itched to brush a strand of hair from her face, to close the space, but I didn't. I shouldn't. And yet, my heart ached in the restraint. Her gaze lifted back to mine, steady, searching. For a second, I thought she might speak, might confess something, anything, but she blinked, shook her head almost imperceptibly, and looked away, lips pressing together as if holding a secret inside. The rain masked the tiny hitch in her breath, the faintest shiver that wasn't entirely from the cold. We stayed there, side by side, listening to the storm, neither moving. I imagined leaning closer, imagined letting the electric silence between us tip into something more. Just imagining it made my pulse race. But then, a car door slammed across the lot, a reminder that the world existed beyond this storm, beyond the narrow doorway, beyond the invisible line she'd drawn. She gave me a small nod and muttered, "I should go." Her voice was soft, hesitant, and just for a heartbeat, it sounded like she was offering me permission, or maybe seeking it. I swallowed hard, staying perfectly still, watching her step into the rain, jacket clutched, notebook in hand. The drizzle caught her hair, plastering a few strands to her cheek, and I noticed the subtle curve of her jaw in the diffused streetlight. I wanted to reach for her, wanted to close the space between us, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stood there, feeling the storm outside and the one she left inside me, and realized how close we had come without ever touching, without ever confessing. And somehow, that almost, just almost, felt worse than any rejection could. The cafe was nearly empty when I saw her sitting at the corner table, notebook open but untouched, eyes fixed on the rain streaking the window. I hesitated at the door, jacket damp, heart thudding, not from the walk, but from seeing her there, quiet and still. She looked up, just briefly, and the faintest smile tugged at her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Not really?" I slid into the seat across from her. Neither of us spoke at first. The hum of the espresso machine and the occasional clink of a cup filled the space, but it wasn't enough to cover the tension coiled between us. I studied her hands, the way they rested lightly on the table, fingers brushing the edge of the notebook, the subtle tremor I hadn't noticed before. She was trying, somehow, to appear calm, but the stillness screamed otherwise. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through me like a knife. I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head, a wry, sad smile forming. "I mean, this." Her hand waved vaguely, taking in the table, the room, the space between us. "I don't know if we're supposed to be here. Or why we even feel like this." I swallowed, feeling the lump in my throat. She was usually so composed, so sure of herself. And yet here she was, asking the question that had been rattling around in my own chest for weeks. I don't know either, I admitted, voice quieter than intended. My fingers fidgeted with the edge of the napkin. "I just notice you. All the time. And I can't seem to stop." Her eyes softened slightly, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. And then she laughed, quiet, half bitter, half amused. "That's terrifying," she said. "I'm supposed to be mature. Supposed to have it together. And yet, here we are, sitting like idiots, waiting for something we can't name." I nodded, unable to find words that could bridge the gap between truth and desire. I wanted to reach across the table, wanted to touch her hand, wanted to say, "I feel it too." But there was something larger at stake, the realization that whatever this was, it wasn't simple. It wasn't casual. It wasn't safe. We sat in silence after that, both of us breathing, both of us aware that the room had grown smaller, closer. Every small movement, the steam curling off her coffee, the way her hair fell against her cheek, the slow blink of her lashes, seemed magnified. It was suffocating and exhilarating at once. Finally, she looked at me, eyes glistening in the dim light. "I'm tired," she whispered, voice breaking slightly. "Tired of pretending I'm fine with just noticing you. Tired of feeling this pull I can't control." I couldn't speak. I only watched as she looked away, small tremor in her lips, the weight of unsaid words pressing down on both of us. And then she said it, the line that lodged itself in my chest and wouldn't leave. "I don't know how much longer I can do this without losing myself." I wanted to reach for her, to say something, anything, but I knew it was too soon. Too dangerous. And yet, even as she left, even as the cafe swallowed her figure into the gray drizzle outside, I knew that silence between us had spoken more than either of us ever could. It started with a voicemail. I had been repairing a small engine, the air thick with grease and metal, when my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated. Voicemails from her were rare, almost deliberate. I pressed play. Her voice came through, quiet and hesitant, like she wasn't sure anyone would hear it. I found something, an old photo. I thought I should share it with someone who might understand. I frowned, wiping my hands on a rag as she walked in. She held a small envelope, worn at the edges. Her expression was guarded, but her eyes betrayed a storm underneath. "Here," she said, pressing it into my hand. Her fingers brushed mine, a fleeting contact that sent a shiver through me. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the careful way she avoided looking directly at me. Inside was a photograph, her, much younger, laughing with a man whose face I didn't know. There was warmth in her smile, but something fragile lingered, a shadow over the edges of her happiness. She began, voice breaking slightly, "I was in love. A long time ago. It ended badly. He didn't stay. And I haven't really talked about it with anyone." Her words landed in me like a weight I didn't expect. I wanted to say something, to comfort her, to bridge the distance, but I only nodded, feeling the emptiness of words. "I'm not telling you this for pity," she added quickly, looking down at her hands, fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. I thought maybe it would help to not carry it alone anymore." I studied her, noticing details I hadn't before, the faint lines around her eyes, the quiet tremble in her lips, the way she bit the inside of her cheek as if holding back the flood of memories. She was strong, always had been, but in this moment, she was human in a way that made my chest ache. I get it," I said finally, voice low, careful. "I lost someone too. It's not easy to let that go. Even years later." My fingers brushed hers again, gently, tentatively. She didn't pull away. She let out a shaky laugh, half bitter, half relieved. "You understand, even you?" Her voice was a whisper, fragile, carrying more trust than she usually gave. For a long moment, we just sat there, our hands close but not quite touching, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. The storm outside had shifted, the rain softened to a drizzle, but inside me, something had shifted too. She looked at me finally, eyes glistening. I don't usually let anyone see this side of me." Her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard, trying to regain composure. I nodded, heart tight. "I'm glad you did." She smiled faintly, small and fleeting, and for the first time, the pull between us felt less like tension and more like gravity. Something had changed, not with a bang, but with the subtle tremor of trust, of shared vulnerability. And when she left, the photograph still in my hand, I realized I was holding more than paper, I was holding the beginning of something I couldn't name, but already feared I couldn't ignore. It was late when we found ourselves alone in the shop again. The day had ended hours ago, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, the scent of oil and coffee lingering like a memory. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching me as I cleaned a toolbox with methodical care. "Why are you still here?" I asked, though I knew the answer. She didn't answer right away, just let her gaze linger on me, sharp but gentle, as if weighing whether to speak or stay silent. "I couldn't leave yet," she said finally, voice quiet. "Some things, some thoughts, they don't wait for convenience." Her fingers traced a faint line along the edge of the counter, slow and deliberate. I stopped, leaning against the opposite workbench, noticing the way the overhead light caught her hair, the soft shadows along her jaw. She looked tired, but not fragile, more like someone who had been carrying a weight for too long and finally allowed herself a pause. I wanted to say something, I wanted to break the distance, but words felt heavy, unnecessary. Instead, I crossed the space between us slowly, our shoulders brushing once, just slightly, and felt the tension in the room shift. She didn't step back. "Look," she said, finally meeting my eyes, "I don't know what this is between us. Or what it should be. But I do know that I can't pretend it doesn't exist." Her voice was steady now, soft but resolute, carrying all the restraint and longing she had held in check for weeks. I nodded, heart hammering quietly, aware that every small gesture, the way she leaned slightly forward, the tilt of her head, the subtle flutter in her eyelids, was saying what words could not. "I don't think we can," I admitted. The simple acknowledgement hung in the air, heavier than any grand declaration, truer than anything I could force from my mouth. We stayed like that, near enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to honor the boundaries we had never fully crossed. Silence stretched between us, intimate and deliberate, and it felt like the most honest thing we could share. Her hand twitched toward mine, almost unconsciously. I caught it lightly, fingertips brushing hers, holding just enough to let her know I was here. I understood. She exhaled softly, a breath of relief, a sigh of acceptance, and leaned just slightly against me, not fully, not yet, but enough. The world outside the shop seemed distant, irrelevant, the storm from earlier now nothing but a memory. Inside, the weight of years, regrets, missed chances, and unspoken words seemed to dissolve in the quiet. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Every glance, every small touch, every shared breath said what neither of us could have put into words. Eventually, she leaned back just a little, smiling faintly, a small curve of lips that carried more than 1,000 confessions. I squeezed her hand once, gently, and let go, letting the moment breathe, letting it exist without forcing it. And in that silence, in the shared space between us, I realized the truth had already settled, the pull, the tension, the quiet obsession, it was ours. Unspoken, inevitable, earned. For the first time, I felt it fully, and she did too, in a way that needed no declaration, no dramatics, just the quiet finality of two people who finally understood each other. I think about that night often, even now, months later, when the world is quieter and the storms we shared feel like distant echoes. Sitting here, in the same shop where everything began, I can still feel her presence in the air, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the corners, the soft weight of her hand against mine, the warmth she carried even in the smallest gestures. We didn't rush. There were no grand declarations, no fireworks to mark the moment. But there was understanding, and there was patience, the kind that builds quietly over days, weeks, months, until it becomes unshakable. That slow burn that had tormented us finally softened into something steady, something we could hold without fear. She's changed, in ways subtle but profound. I see it in her laugh, lighter now, with fewer shadows hiding behind it. She leans into moments, not away from them. There's a softness in her gaze that wasn't there before, a willingness to let someone in without losing herself. And I've changed too, more aware, more patient, more honest with myself about what I want and what I need. I don't chase shadows anymore. I recognize the gravity of real connection when it comes close enough to touch. Love, I've learned, isn't always about passion or drama. Sometimes it's about noticing. Noticing the way her fingers brush the edge of the notebook, the small tremor in her voice, the way she pauses in a doorway, unsure. It's about showing up, quietly, even when nothing seems to happen. It's about being steady when the world isn't. I remember one evening, sitting side by side in the shop, rain tapping softly on the windows, both of us silent except for the occasional rustle of paper. Her head tilted toward mine for a fraction of a second, a gesture so small I could have missed it. But I didn't. I felt it, deep down, and it was enough. That's when I realized, we had built something no storm could wash away. We've learned that love doesn't need to be loud to be true. It doesn't need grand gestures or confessions shouted over rain. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it's just two people showing up for each other again and again, trusting the unspoken, holding the fragile, delicate edges of each other's hearts. And now, whenever she enters the room, I notice the details, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes catch the light, the faintest brush of her fingers against mine. It's the afterglow of everything we've survived, everything we've admitted only in glances and pauses. I don't know how it will end, or if it ever truly ends. But I know this, I wouldn't trade a single hesitation, a single unspoken moment, for anything. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?